The box hummed like a tiny engine, a corroded rectangle nested on a steel desk deep inside the vault. My gloves hovered over its seal. Open, and I might free a hazard or a truth. Leave it, and time would erase what the world had erased already. Legal exposure pressed hard. Chain of custody, contamination, trespass. But the weight of history sat heavy in my hands. This wasn't luck. The map that brought me here arrived folded into a library ledger with a page missing, a whisper of a century erased. To understand why I was here at all, you need the day the map surfaced. The donation box came mislabeled, ephemera, local civic. It landed on my intake table like any other stray legacy, a cardboard rectangle soft with damp corners and the faint drag of mildew. I logged it after hours, the way I do when the building quiets and the fluorescent hum becomes a metronome. I opened the lid, expecting parade programs and church bulletins. Instead, a ledger. The ledger had the look of authority dulled by neglect. Canvas spine cracked, pages the color of tea. A faint pencil grid ghosted the margins. In the back, a corner had been repaired with old cellophane tape that had ambered into resin. The tape held more than paper. It held a fold. I eased the corner up. The tape resisted, then let go with a thin sigh, and the smell of old paste lifted, sweet, tired. Out slid a sheet, thin as onion skin, its edges brittle, ink the dark sepia that water remembers. Across it ran a delicate matrix of lines and numbers, and then odd marks in the margin, ticks and triangles, keyed like an elevation code someone didn't want noticed. Institutional fear lives in small choices. We don't like surprises because surprises make liability. But duty to preserve is a simple rule. You don't throw away what you don't understand. So I logged the ledger, the insert, the tape fragment. I wrote the time. I wrote the humidity. I kept going. Tracing the grid with a light, I saw it wasn't a simple plat. There were contour rings that didn't match any municipal map I knew. When I overlaid the insert on a standard survey file, elevations fell into place like teeth aligning. Military. The earlier the overlay sang in a quiet way, its symbols were spare and stubborn. One icon repeated, a box with an arrow. Storage, if you read the old key sets the way I do. Where the index should have explained the symbols, the ledger's page was torn. A ragged crescent remained, the bite mark of someone's urgency. At the bottom, a violet stamp bled through the paper. A base designation that has no budget line anymore, decommissioned in the last century. Filed into that gray corner where things survive without names. On the inside cover, a librarian's hand had once written, "Do not circulate." It was crossed out with a single line. Beneath it, the same phrase, darker, pressed into the fibers. Someone argued with themselves. Someone lost and then wrote it louder. I aligned edges. The map's left margin kissed a forgotten range outside town, a shoulder of land that's become recreational and forgetful. Under modern parcel grids, a snake of road appeared, thin and pale. A service road that doesn't exist anymore except in the habits of sagebrush and the way Earth remembers straight lines. Notify or verify. Policy says report. Experience says incompleteness invites deletion. I drafted a sealed memo, date, asset number, description, and addressed it to myself and to the chief archivist. I did not send it. I placed it in a private envelope in the off-site box. Chain of custody isn't only about evidence. It's about promises to the future. On the insert, one tiny triangle was circled twice. The double circle wasn't a flourish. The graphite line dug deeper, as if the hand that drew it pressed through thought into warning. I traced it with my fingertip, feeling the indentation pressed there decades ago. That mark would matter, though I didn't yet know why. I pulled microfilm of regional surveys. I pulled orchard maps, BLM parcels, and an old telephone utility diagram whose legend smelled like carbon ribbon. The same number whispered across them. Quiet, consistent, never explained. A code that made a path. When codes repeat, you follow. The ledger's hand entries tracked inventories of infectious things, grease, bolts, gloves, canvas tarps, until they didn't. A column of units listed as sealed containers. No quantities, just dashes. In the margin, the tiny pencil ticks aligned with the grid on the insert. Whoever kept this understood how to hide something in plain numbers. That night I stayed late. The air was heavy with dust and the faint sweetness of long decayed hay that clung to donations from farm outbuildings. I snapped photos with a scale and a color card, logged voice notes for provenance, and numbered each piece. Then I did something I don't write lightly. I folded the insert into a protective sleeve, slid it into my field folder, and set my alarm for before sunrise. I walked the map with my eyes until I could feel the ground it described. The double circle sat near the end of the erased service road, just where contour lines tightened and a drainage line cut a shallow V. Storage, the icon said, but storage of what was the question that had been circled twice. The ledger never answered. It simply led. I placed my notebook on the ledger's open spine and wrote 3 rules. Don't alter. Don't assume. Don't go alone inside if the air is wrong. Then I added a 4th. If you find harm, you hold it gently. The weight of the purchase pressed on me far heavier than any price tag could. I had not bought a ruin, but I had accepted its secrets. With coordinates, doubt, and a sealed memo waiting in a quiet envelope, I closed the archive, locked the door, and took the map into the dark. Dawn was a thin bruise on the horizon when I turned off the highway. The range rose low and patient, a muted spine. The map lay on the passenger seat inside its sleeve, edges held flat by a clipboard, a quiet authority beside me. The road narrowed, then it lost interest in being a road at all. The air was heavy with dust and the faint sweetness of long decayed hay that lingers in fence posts and barn rafters long after animals go. My tires found ruts and followed them like grooves cut by repetition. Survey stakes, bleached to bone, leaned at odd angles. Every gust pushed at the door handle as if testing the latch. I logged a timestamp into my recorder, then named my coordinates and the weather. Habit is armor. Trespass laws aren't abstract when you can feel them in your shoulders. Unexploded ordnance warnings aren't folklore when the land once belonged to a training grid. I listed risks out loud the way I inventory boxes. Access, contamination, collapse, legal exposure. Each risk has a countermeasure. None of them erase consequence. I kept driving. The land said one thing, the map said another. The contour lines told me to trust the invisible. I watched the altimeter on my phone and let the scheduled rise pull me left where the earth pretended to be flat. When the ground tilted under the tires, I knew I was on the right ghost of a road. A drainage culvert undercut the track. From its dark mouth, a faint hum, not wind, a sense of vibration more than sound, like power had once learned a path here and never fully forgot it. I stopped at a rusted gate that had outlived the men who hung it. The chain wore a coat of orange and years, But the padlock was newer, too clean, its chrome scuffed by recent keys. That mismatch told a story. The structure aged, the control refreshed. I photographed the lock, then the chain links one by one. I pressed a gloved finger to the steel, warm from the same pale sun I felt on my neck. No heat differential, no hidden current. Still, I noted the padlock's brand and stamped number. There, half swallowed by cheekgrass, a concrete survey marker. Its face was stamped with a number that matched the ledger's margin code. Not a coincidence. A breadcrumb. I brushed grit from its edges and read the compass arrows. The alignment matched the map's grid orientation, rotated a few degrees from true north. Whoever did this wanted their system to be the only system that mattered. Parallel to the track, a corroded conduit line disappeared into sagebrush, little metal junction boxes rising like mussel shells along a dead shore. Power once ran here. Maybe data, maybe alarms. The conduit bent toward nothing visible and then dipped, swallowed by the slope. I traced it with my eyes until it vanished. I recorded, conduit present, non-operational, direction southwest. Photograph 3, reference stake E. A sign lay charred against a fence post, its corners crisped as if someone had tried to erase its language with flame. Through the soot, letters ghosted, restricted area. The agency listed below, the one meant to scare you, no longer exists. Agencies change their names, their missions, their budgets. Infrastructure just sits and waits for someone to ask the right questions. I slid the sign into a bag. Ash rubbed off on the plastic like graphite. This was not folklore. Someone had built to hide. Then bureaucracies shifted like sand, and the paperwork that named it blew away. The decision to erase a name doesn't erase the concrete it labeled. I stood at the gate and felt how empty silence can be when it's curated. 50 paces beyond the fence, the map's double circle would sit where contour lines pinched. I counted steps out loud, pressed my boot on each number as if notarizing the ground. A raven lifted from a fence wire and cut a black line across the pale morning. I scanned for tripwires, for disturbed soil, for the tidy geometry of human intent. Nothing fresh, just the echo of order. I stepped over the gate, testing weight on the top rail before committing. The chain clinked once, a small sound in a wide place. The wind pressed against my jacket, and then let go. I breathed through my nose, slow, measuring any hint of chemical or rot. The air carried dust and sun-warmed sage. No sharpness. I moved forward. The culvert's hum settled into my bones. I followed its direction the way a blind person follows heat. The ground dipped, and then, just beyond a tangle of rabbit brush, the land changed tone underfoot, from crumbly duff to something harder, flattened long ago. I knelt and brushed away grit. Concrete peered up, poured and stippled, and then a seam. The map had been right. The double circle waited just ahead, a warning pressed into graphite, and now into earth. The hillside looked ordinary until it didn't. A shallow fold in the slope gathered shadow in a way that refused the sun. I brushed away grit and found texture where there should have been stone. Poured concrete, trowel marks faint as fingerprints, disguised under a skin of paint. Lichen clung, but its roots sat on pigment, not rock. Someone had taught the hill to lie. Physical danger lives in the first breath. Collapse, bad air, surveillance you can't see. I stood still and listened to the ground. Nothing moved inside the seam, no settling pop, no trickle. I logged an entry in my pocket notebook. Threshold located, artificial face, possible door, air check pending. Then I timed my breaths, slow and even, a metronome against panic. My glove found a recessed plate, a rectangle cut so exact it made everything around it look crude. I slid my fingers under the lip. It resisted like a memory. Then it gave, sticky with old grease, and a narrow panel swung free. Inside, a lever. The metal felt cold through the glove, colder than the air, reluctant. I pulled. A deep latch shifted behind the wall, then the seam exhaled. Stale, cold air rolled over my face, mineral, still, with a dry sweetness that belonged to old cardboard and long-closed rooms. The first door opened on a corridor not much wider than my shoulders. Hinges complained in a voice of metal starved for oil. Conduits ran the walls like a rib cage, arcs and junctions labeled in a palette I knew by heart. Muted olive, mustard. The blue-gray that institutions chose when they wanted to look neutral forever. The vault felt like a machine waiting for instructions it hadn't received in years. I whispered the date into the dark. It's a habit born from empty buildings and the need to prove to yourself that you are real inside places designed to erase you. My voice came back thinner, absorbed by painted concrete. I stepped forward and let my light skim across stenciled numbers. The fonts belonged to a procurement office with a fondness for blocky clarity. The numbering system echoed the ledger's icon set. Squares, arrows, a tiny triangle tucked into a corner of a label. Not coincidence. Continuity. The corridor knuckled left to a second barrier. A door with a rotary wheel sat snug as a ship's bulkhead. The wheel carried teeth around its rim, each one worn smooth. Frequent use once, then years of nothing. I set my recorder near my collar and spoke. Second door, mechanical, no obvious power, attempting manual open. Above the frame, a small glass ampule was taped, clouded white like breath on winter glass. It made no sense there. Trigger? Indicator? It would matter, but not yet. I grasped the wheel and turned, slow at first to feel if anything fought me. The metal groaned, rewarded by the slow nod of bolts withdrawing from sockets. Then a small snap, sharp and final. I froze. No alarm, only the delicate tick of cooling metal, the way engines kind of talk to themselves after work. I waited for my pulse to stop writing its own script across my ribs, then shouldered the door inward. Silence had weight in that room, not the blank quiet of emptiness, an attentive quiet, like the space itself was practicing. Rows of lockers stood with their mouths closed, each with a tag holder empty or jammed with a stub of card. A service desk squatted at the near wall, a dented metal thing with a blotter still stained a deep, permanent green. On it, the corroded box from my opening moment waited, humming faintly as if it remembered current, even if none ran here anymore. The hum threaded the air like a tuning fork someone had struck once and walked away from. I circled the room with my light low to catch dust trails and prints. No recent disturbance. The floor held a skin of fine powder that my boots rode on. I logged the room. Dimensions approximate. Fixtures present. Lockers, 15 per row. Desk, 1. Adjunct chair collapsed in a corner. The stenciled numbers on each locker matched those from the ledger's icon series. and the paint colors confirmed origin. Military palette, mid-century into late, maintained long enough to outlast the budget line that birthed it. I crouched under the service desk and found a small switchboard tucked beneath. Dead, but intact. Its toggle labels yellowed to the color of old teeth. A coiled cord led to a handset hung on a hook. I lifted it and heard the clean nothingness of a line cut at the trunk. The ampule above the door nudged at my thoughts again. Whatever this place listened for once, it didn't anymore. The vault recognized no authority now. Its silence was permission and warning in equal measure. The human trace steadied me. A pencil nub, bitten. A coffee ring near the desk's edge. A scuff on the floor where a chair used to live. It was not merely abandoned. It had been used with purpose, and perhaps with secrecy. I spoke my name into my recorder, then the time, then the rules I'd written in the archive. I said them out loud to make them harder to betray. The hum tugged me toward the desk, toward the corroded box. But this chapter was about thresholds, about learning a room before letting it learn you. I ran my light along the ceiling and found the air vents caked shut with dust. No exchange. I cracked a chemical badge near my collar and waited. No color change. Oxygen enough. I walked the perimeter. The locker's hinges were groaning when tested, but one responded with a softer sound, as if it had been oiled last, the memory of care lingering in the metal. I marked it for later. In the far wall, a slim service hatch sat flush, paint bridging metal to concrete in a thick seam. The keyhole was smaller than a dime, and around it, 3 initials had been scratched into the paint with a sharp, impatient tool. I didn't yet have the key, but the scratch marks told me a person, not a policy, had made the last decision here. I wrote the initials into my notebook, underlined them twice, then turned back to the desk where the box hummed like a held breath. The threshold was crossed. The vault had opened its first door. Now it was time to choose what to touch. The hum followed me as I stood before the locker with the softened hinge. Choosing what to open first shapes what you think you've found. Hardware is loud. People are the signal. I slid the latch, slow, letting the metal announce me to whatever ghosts still kept inventory. The door stuck, then surrendered. The smell met me first. Oilcloth, old graphite, the shy sweetness of paper that's been sealed too long. Inside, field notebooks lay wrapped in oilcloth, edges frayed to a suede softness from hands that turned them, then stocked. I lifted the bundle and felt the unsteady weight of recorded days. Under the cloth, the covers were stiff with varnish, lettering stamped in a utilitarian font, a procurement officer's dream of order. I set them on the desk blotter and opened the first with a flat hand, spreading pressure so the spine would forgive me. The handwriting was clipped, efficient. Weather first, always. Wind direction, barometric pressure, humidity. A habit born of environments where air could be an enemy. Then, a catalog of test sites, each reduced to coordinates and a brief objective. Names were there, but they were bitten out with thick graphite, erased into ghost impressions that the paper still held like bruises. I angled the light and saw the indentations. People were present even where their names refused to appear. A note lay tucked beneath the first page, thin, off-size, cut from a different stock. If found, return to, and then a scrape where an address had once lived. The fibers were torn to pulp, not cleanly razored. Fear lives in that kind of destruction. Someone standing over a bin, rubbing and rubbing until location turned to paste. I recorded, anonymous return note, address removed by abrasion. Evidence of intent to sever provenance. Stuck to the locker's inner wall, a Polaroid had fused to the paint along one edge. I eased it free with a metal spatula, coaxing the emulsion away without tearing the past. Two gloved hands held a small container with tongs. The background matched this room, the service desk's dent, the blotter's stain, the angle of the vent above. The container wore a tamper seal like the one on the corroded box. The photo had been taken to prove a step in a procedure, not to tell a story. It told one anyway. The notebooks referred to Operation Custodian in a tone so casual it made my teeth hurt. No dates in the headers, just sequence numbers. Where a date might have been, there was a gap, a blank like a missing tooth. Careful redaction, panic tear. The edges of the paper said deliberate. The rhythm said fear. A person erases differently when they're being watched. On page 9, a pressed wildflower lay flat against a datasheet. Filaments pale, petals turned to parchment. It had been cradled between observations about hose integrity and ambient readings, as if the writer needed something soft in reach while they wrote about hard things. I closed my eyes and pictured a hand picking it outside the door, pressing it here to interrupt the machinery of their day with proof that the world still grew. Then the entries developed a loop, coffee times logged like prayer, radio checks marked with exact seconds, and then threaded through pages, one short word repeating with slight variations. Leak? Sometimes it was underlined once, sometimes twice, then an entry where the question mark was gone. Leak. Contained. The period sat heavy, as if belief could be hammered into being by punctuation. I kept my ethical line. I read enough to establish practice and risk, not to trespass into private letters that didn't belong to the public yet. A smaller notebook wedged behind held personnel notes, the kind of quiet ledger supervisors kept when they were asked to weigh humans against procedures. I didn't read names aloud. I logged their presence, closed the covers, and breathed. Tucked deeper, a carbon copy form listed custodian, receiving, with boxes checked in a hand I recognized across the set. The pressured downstroke of a certain letter, the impatience in numerals. Serial numbers matched the margin codes from the ledger back at the archive. The story wasn't random. It was engineered, then misfiled, then left to sleep. On the locker's back wall, someone had scratched a sentence into paint so thin the letters almost vanished. Stayed until the end of the leak. The last word smeared, as if the hand had hesitated, or the paint was wet, or the person decided halfway through that truth needed softening. I traced the groove without touching, following the angle of each letter. The weight of the discovery pressed on me again. This wasn't a myth. It was a job. I flipped a notebook and found a small grid pinned to a page with a paperclip nearly dissolved by rust. It was a schedule. Rosters broken into shifts. Timings for public quieting, a phrase so bureaucratically gentle it hid teeth. The double circle from my map appeared next to select entries, a quiet alarm next to routine. Secondary containment failures, if I read the logic right. The map hadn't been only terrain. It was a code for incidents. I closed the notebooks, rewrapped them in oilcloth, and replaced them in the locker, exactly as I'd found them, minus a few flakes of rust that fell like tired confetti. The hum from the desk grew louder, or maybe my attention sharpened. The vault had given me the human trail. Hands, habits, A pressed flower. A line carved in paint. The map had led me here. The box on the desk would tell me why. Stakes make your hands slower. I set the recorder beside the blotter, angled the mic toward the faint hum, and read my own presence into the room. Name, time, purpose, rules. Opening might free hazard or truth. Both spread. Chain of custody means decisions are legible later. I listed gloves, mask, badge, and the bag numbers waiting for anything removed. Then I faced the box. Its surface was a field of corrosion, greens and browns blooming where paint had given up. Under the bloom, cereals survived, stubborn. I wiped with a dry swab, and the digits came clear enough to match the ledger's margin codes from the archive. The same hand that arranged notebooks arranged this. The hum vibrated faintly through my fingertips, a mosquito of sound living inside old metal. The tamper seal sat intact across the lid seam, a brittle plastic ribbon stamped with a number that had long outlived any clerk who logged it. Intact, yet fragile, the kind that surrenders in flakes. I traced the edges and felt a slight rise near one corner. A screw there was wrong. The head didn't match its siblings, different metal, different thread, the slot scarred by a tool used in a hurry. Someone closed this in a rush and promised themselves they'd return. They didn't. A smell like metallic ozone hung just above the lid. Old batteries and rain. Not sharp enough to warn me away, but present enough to place me in a scene where current had a voice once. I leaned closer, and the lid seemed to flex with my pulse, a trick of light and attention that made the box feel alive. I stepped back, breathed, and let the sensation pass. On the front lip, a small label, half-peeled, read, "Custodian, Transfer." The word "transfer" had been scored over with a blade until the paper frayed. Someone had disagreed with what the box wanted to be. I photographed the label, then the score marks, then my ruler laid beside them for scale. I spoke to the recorder. Label indicates movement intent overridden. Interpret as retention under duress. I turned the box slowly to inspect each side. On the underside, a hand-scratched arrow pointed toward that non-original screw. Not official, not neat. A message from the last mechanic to the next. I logged the arrow and the direction. Then I pressed my palm flat on the lid and felt nothing but the hum and the chill of metal in a cold room. No heat build, no static bite. I checked the chemical badge again, still calm. Before you cross a line, you tell the future why. I clicked record on a clean audio file and said my name, the location, the description of the container, and the reason for opening. Imminent risk of environmental degradation to contents. Presence of documentary evidence indicating history under erasure. Lack of active authority maintaining site. The weight of the discovery pressed on me. Stewardship is a word until it's a hinge under your hand. I chose the non-original screw first. It gave with a dry squeal, threads chewing at themselves as if they resented being asked to work again. The seal sighed when pressure changed, a quiet, papery exhale. I waited. No hiss, no smoke, just a shift in the air and a softening of the hum, as if the box had been holding a note and decided it had done its job. I lifted the lid a fraction. Time gathered in that crack, dust motes turning like a slow galaxy. I raised it further, steady, avoiding any quick draft that might disturb something delicate inside. The interior was lined with felt long since gone hard. Within, lay envelopes sealed in wax, thin yet heavy with dense paper. A blueprint roll, banded with aging tape, rested along one side. There was also a small key on a tag, the card browned with age, 3 initials written in a hand I recognized from the locker rosters. I called out each item, numbered them, and photographed their positions before touching anything. Then I lifted one envelope. The wax bore the same doubled circle symbol from the map, pressed deep enough to carry through the decades. This was the thread. I set it aside for last and took the blueprint roll first, easing the tape back with a warm blade so the paper wouldn't tear. The drawing unfurled with a memory of stiffness, lines precise, measured legends speaking in the language of valves, vents, and flows. Not a bomb, a procedure. Routing for sealed containers, decontamination bays, silence rooms. The vault was not a dragon's hoard. It was a relay point and a memory bank. I felt relief that tasted like metal. Procedure means people believed in systems. Systems can be read, questioned, changed. Weapons leave less room to negotiate with the dead. I rolled the blueprint closed and sheltered it in a fresh tube from my pack. Then I took the key. The tag's initials matched the scratches around the slim lock in the back wall. A person had written themselves into metal twice. The hum had quieted to a faint suggestion, as if opening relieved a circuit of its duty. I picked up the envelope with the doubled circle and turned it under the light. Edges perfect. No tampering. I recorded Envelope 1, doubled circle seal, likely incident index. Opening for documentary review only, minimal handling. I warmed the wax with my palm, slid a blade beneath, and lifted it whole. Inside, a typed directive waited, dry language wrapped around live consequences. But that was the next chapter. I closed the lid without locking it, reseated the non-original screw 2 turns for safety, and logged seal status as broken with intent, recorded rationale appended. Then I sat back, the blueprint safe, the key warm in my glove, the envelope breathing history into my hands. The choice to open hadn't been curiosity dressed up. It was stewardship under pressure, a hinge turned for those who'd been kept outside the door. I slid the directive from its envelope and felt how the paper held itself. Government stock, dense, the kind chosen to outlast administrations. The typeface marched in calm lines, as if tone could dilute impact. Retrieval, neutralization, public quieting. Words that turned emergencies into tasks. My throat went dry. I read aloud for the recorder, steady, and stopped whenever the text crossed from procedure into harm. Schedules followed like vertebrae. Shift rosters arranged by initials, not names, a grid optimized for deniability. Movement orders traced a circuit between unnamed sites and this vault, each leg timed to the minute, each package labeled sealed container, contents unlisted by design. One column marked return for adjudication, another transfer for oblivion. The language was clean, the intent was not. Logistics maps wore arrows that matched the blueprint's flow paths. Inside this place, sealed containers entered, paused in a silence room, then moved through decontamination to a holding bay whose capacity had been redacted with white paint that aged to ivory. I angled the page and saw the ghost of numbers beneath the paint. Someone, had tried to make quantity uncountable. The paper remembered anyway. A memo tucked behind the directive described legacy materials stored under innocuous structures, farm buildings, pump houses, seed sheds, the ordinary turned into cover. The phrasing tried to sound pastoral. Distridio low-visibility environments. I pictured outbuildings where the air was heavy with dust and the faint sweetness of long-decayed hay, and below that, containers that didn't belong to seasons or harvests. The thought sat like grit between teeth. Then, a list of commendations without names, each citation written in a voice that wanted to honor while erasing the honored. Remained on post during breach. Executed public quieting with minimal escalation. One note arrested me. Stayed until the end of the leak. The word end smudged, ink softened by a thumb that lingered. I recognized the smudge from the locker wall, the same pressure, the same person refusing to let a phrase stand without their body speaking through it. Paper shifted tone. A hand-inked addendum leaned hard into the page, pen biting fibers until the letters bled. Do not catalog item 12. No acronym, no code, just a command, pressed so deep the page torn slightly at the downstroke. Someone with authority felt fear, and fear chose secrecy over record. I let the weight of that sentence settle. The absence it created would echo. I spread the map insert beside the directive. In each roster, a tiny symbol appeared, the doubled circle from my original sheet, set like a low bell beside certain dates. Cross-referencing, a pattern took shape. The doubled circle did not mark storage. It marked what followed storage when storage failed. Secondary containment failures. Incidents, not places. The map had never been a simple path to a door. It was a key to the days the system cracked. I turned the page and found forms for public quieting. The euphemism chilled more than any hazard symbol. Protocols instructed teams to control narratives within hours, reroute traffic, seed alternate explanations, coordinate with local entities under non-disclosure. The template left blanks for cover event, brush fire, equipment testing, water main repair. The banality of choices was a strategy. You don't hide a vault with darkness, you hide it with a plausible Tuesday. A thin packet labeled Legacy Routes described how sealed containers moved cross-country without ever belonging to a manifest. The language treated distance like bleach. At junctions, assets were to be renamed by sticker. When stickers failed, they were to be painted over. The memo suggested doing it outdoors to minimize inhalation, as if safety could be aerosolized into the open sky. I kept my ethical note front and center. Health implications threaded these pages, but the most vulnerable people were unnamed. I flagged the categories without speaking specifics into a public record. Exposure risks to workers, to nearby communities, to night shift neighbors who saw lights on where there shouldn't have been any, and never knew why the cough wouldn't lift. I refused to turn pain into spectacle. Evidence would speak without me narrating suffering like a tour. The directive's last section reframed purpose in sterile cadence. Custodian maintains continuity between containment lines, archives decision paths, preserves operational discretion. It pretended to be neutral. It wasn't. The vault was part archive, part triage, part silence machine. An apparatus designed to keep the story organized for those inside and disorganized for everyone else. I sealed the directive back into a fresh sleeve and returned it to the tray, hands slow, steps traced for the camera. Then I sorted through the remaining envelopes. One held shift logs printed on thermal paper that had browned to tea. Another contained maintenance requests for the rotary door, the ampule above it labeled indicator, atmospheric trigger. If it fogged, the door was to stay shut. My stomach tightened. That small glass eye had been watching for a century to keep air from mixing stories that shouldn't. At the bottom of the box, a card the size of a palm index lay face down. I turned it. Doubled circle at top right, the keys 3 initials at bottom left, and in the center, a short list of entries stamped with dates in a format that skipped years. Each entry ended with a location reduced to coordinates, later crossed out and replaced with practical names: a park, a warehouse, a cul-de-sac. The ripples had moved outward. The world had grown over them. I picked up the key again. It fit my glove like a decision waiting. There was one last door at the back, a lock so modest you'd miss it if you didn't know the person who'd scratched their initials into paint wanted you to find it. I stood, the directive's voice still in my ears, and felt the room tilt toward that lock, like a compass aligning to a field it trusted. Stewardship isn't theory in a place like this. It's turning a key and facing what the chest keeps. The key turned like it remembered my hand. The slim lock in the back wall yielded with a small domestic click that felt wrong in a room built like a battleship. When the panels swung, the vault breathed out a colder air, the kind that holds dust mid-fall and keeps smells from finishing their sentences. I stepped inside and let the light adjust the room into view. Shelves lined 3 walls, each holding labeled tins arranged with a care that felt devotional. The labels were typed, then corrected by hand, different inks aging at different speeds. In the center sat a wooden chest scarred by transit, its corners armored with brass. Tags clung to its handles, layered like the rings of a tree. One agency, then another, then a third that never announced itself beyond a routing number repeated across decades. Bureaucracy changed uniforms. The payload kept reporting for duty. I walked the perimeter before touching anything, reading the shelves aloud for the recorder. The words were plain: samples, film, logs, debris. Debris chilled me more than any technical term. Debris belongs to accidents and grief. I lifted one tin. It chimed faintly against its neighbor, a sound that said glass lived inside metal. I set it down and faced the chest. Its lid bore a number burned deep, the kind of mark meant to outlast weather. I photographed each tag, the earliest on brittle cloth, the latest on plastic stiffened by cold. The same routing number threaded through them like a spine. Continuity through change. I slipped the hasp and opened the chest. A child's shoe lay on top, small and scuffed, its leather hardened into a shape that remembered running. A tag called it debris. Perimeter. No child named, no street, just the fact of it. I cradled it for a second and then set it back, snapping the shutter twice. Beside it, a vial rested in a cushioned slot. The label offered only a year, nothing else, as if time alone could explain content. I didn't lift it. I logged it and moved on. Beneath, a diary fragment lived in plastic, pages torn clean from a binding that didn't survive. The handwriting slanted with the fast pressure of a person who needed to put down words before they were taken. I read a single line for the record, and only a single line. We were told not to look. I returned it to its sleeve. refusing to turn a life into proof against itself. Micro-stories filled the chest's lower layer. A locker tag snapped from its chain. A lunch token from a factory that once paid in metal. A photograph of a farmhouse porch lit at night. Chairs empty. A truck idling just out of frame. Paper notes spoke about evacuations scheduled in the dark to avoid panic. Names erased into counts. 23 moved, 7 stayed, 5 unaccounted. The arithmetic of absence. I chose one tin that rattled and opened it an inch. Inside lay a broken dosimeter, its needle stuck at a panic angle, and a film badge blackened to its edge like a burned leaf. I didn't need numbers. The badge had already done the math. I photographed, sealed, and returned it, my breath shallow without meaning to be. The chest didn't collect secrets to hoard them. It saved proof for whoever would come next with a map and a stubborn need to record. The doubled circle symbol waited again on a card at the bottom, printed clean, not hand-drawn. It listed sites, each first as coordinates, then overwritten by ordinary nouns. A park with swings. A warehouse with a loading dock that still groans. A cul-de-sac where kids chalk galaxies into asphalt. The ink had faded on some lines, but the intent felt fresh. Life had grown over unmarked lines. I closed the chest gently. The room's quiet seemed to lengthen, as if listening back. I inventoried my own condition out loud. Steady hands, clear head, badge unchanged, and packed evidence the way I'd want someone to pack mine. Labeled, buffered, traceable. The vault had given enough for one breath. At the threshold, I paused and looked again at the shelves. The tins would wait. The chest would wait. The story, now awake, would not. I slipped the key into my pocket. The tag's 3 initials warmed against my palm, a human temperature holding a century of procedure and avoidance. Outside, there would be calls, statements, resistance sharpened by habit. But here, the air still held the outline of what was done and what was denied. I stepped back into the main room and let the door close, the latch settling like a period. The hum barely murmured now. I spoke to the recorder. Back room secured, chest closed, proof present. Then I folded the map along its crease and felt the doubled circle under my thumb. The vault had taught me its language. It expected me to speak. Outside, the wind had found its voice. It dragged along the hillside and pressed a low moan through the culvert like a throat clearing before testimony. I stood at the threshold and closed my eyes until the vault's silence let go of my ears. Then, I began the part that matters most after discovery. Custody. I spoke each step into the recorder. Exiting primary chamber. Personal decon dry. No liquid on site. Packaging sequence starting. I sealed the blueprint into a buffered sleeve, then a rigid tube, labeled with time, location, and the code I'd assigned to the site. The directive, the rosters, the incident card with ordinary nouns over coordinates, each went into individual enclosures. The vial stayed where it was. The shoe stayed. Proof doesn't need to be moved to be true. It needs to be documented so it can be found again without me. I photographed the locker interiors, the service desk, the ampule, the wheel. I took oblique shots to catch surface relief where ink had bitten paper. I filmed a slow pan across shelves without lingering on items that belonged to families, not an audience. Then I narrated a chain of custody statement, spoken in one take, so I couldn't edit myself into a cleaner conscience later. Time codes, device ID, glove changes, bag numbers, seal numbers. I made a ledger out of my breath. At the door, I looked up at the glass ampule and finally understood its job. Atmospheric trigger, the maintenance note had called it. It wasn't a trap. It was a watcher. Fog meant the air had turned traitor. Today it was clouded by age alone. I logged its condition and pulled the rotary wheel shut until the bolts found their sockets. The snap this time sounded like a promise kept. The sun had shifted. Shadows shortened. I stepped back into open air and felt dust settle on my skin like a film. At the rusted gate, the padlock still shined too clean against the chain's orange fatigue. I stood there while the wind pulled at my jacket and made the fence sing in short, bright notes. The map inside my pocket felt like a live wire, the doubled circle pressed against the fabric as if reminding me of its other meaning. Days when containment failed, not just a place where a door hid in a hill. I took a breath that felt like a decision and started drafting statements in my head. 2 paths, both necessary. One for the public record, dates, objects, procedures, the existence of Operation Custodian and its purpose as described in the documents, the evidence secured, the agencies that would receive copies. No names of workers, no voyeurism. Another for families who might be named by absence. A careful letter inviting them into the archive once a process existed to protect them from spectacle, and to protect the record from being used as a weapon. Authority would not arrive as a single door opening. It would arrive as pressure. I wrote an ethics brief on the hood of my car with the wind slapping the paper, outlining why silence had caused harm and why distributing custody would prevent a single gatekeeper from burying the past again. I listed recipients, a regional health archive, an independent university repository with hazardous materials protocols, a journalist whose work I trusted with redactions as a tool, not a blade. Originals would stay sealed until a clean room could host them. Surrogates would travel. Phones make reporting fast, but speed without redundancy is how stories die. I recorded a readout of the brief into my device and backed it up to an encrypted drive already waiting in my go bag. Then I sent a message to the chief archivist, a neutral alert that a sealed memo awaited in the off-site box, to be opened only after a meeting with outside counsel and an independent archivist present. I did not mention the vault by description. I mentioned the principle: legacy materials that implicate public health and require immediate preservation. I expected the counter-narrative before it formed. Property concerns. Trespass. You shouldn't have been there. Liability as a blanket pulled over a bed of facts. I wrote the phrase that would guide my replies. We are stewards. We do not own the past. I breathed, then added the practical shield. Chain of custody logged. Exposure mitigations taken. No hazardous substances moved. Only documents and images recorded in situ. Notifications initiated within hours. You meet pressure with process. While the wind worked the wire, I unfolded the map across the gate and let the papers snap and settle. I traced the doubled circles again with my eyes. Then I saw it. One margin note I had overlooked in my exhaustion. A faint pencil word beside a tiny offset triangle. Repeat. The hand that wrote it belonged to the same person who pressed "Do not catalog item 12" into the directive. Their caution had left breadcrumbs for someone stubborn enough to follow. If incidents had signatures, this was a second. A different site, not far, hidden under a modest grid of parcels that had been divided and sold and replatted into comfort. My stomach tightened. The world grows over things. That doesn't mean the roots don't find the old lines and follow them. I folded the map and slotted it away. The key with 3 initials warmed through the fabric against my palm. A human temperature reminding me why this wasn't a hunt. It was a duty. I spoke one more time to the recorder. Custody established. Notifications in motion. Secondary site indicated by margin note. Ending field session. Then I got in the car, closed the door on the wind's argument, and let the engine's even idle give me a neutral sound to think against. The vault had given enough. Outside, consequence would begin. The choice to open wasn't curiosity. It was stewardship, a hinge turned to keep a legacy from dissolving under concrete and polite forgetting. What lived inside that vault shaped lives beyond its walls. Artifacts resisted erasure by waiting, patient and cold, until someone listened. If this kind of careful unraveling matters to you, subscribe and tell me where you're listening from so we can map the chorus. Don't miss the next chapter. There's a second site hiding in a margin note, and we're going to follow it. Join the journey and uncover the next hidden truth. The key with 3 initials still warms my palm.